Welcome to Big Closet, Small Planet. I am Mike Schrager, and welcome to this special edition for the Scandinavian Textile Initiative for Climate Action Week. Um, was that enthusiastic, Nicole? Because my colleague said I need to be
Totally.
more enthusiastic when I
I think
introduce these
you
things.
nailed it, Mike.
Okay, I really, really hope so.
Yeah.
Apparently, my previous intros were too neutral or deadpan. Anyway, I'm very excited to have Nicole Rycroft here. Rycroft, I often get it wrong there. Rycroft,
That's all
uh,
right.
um, even though we've now known each other for a while. But I'm very happy to have you here because of the context for the Climate Action Week. You're working a lot, mobilizing, flying around, getting people involved, a lot on what we call next generation materials, but I'll let you put the context and explain that. I
Mhm.
wanted to check in to see where we are in this. If I put some context on it, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, uh, there is obviously a big footprint from fibers and materials on greenhouse gases, and of course, many other environmental impact areas, and of course, people because of that. On the GHG side, there are some estimates, I think, from Textile Exchange that by 2030, if we're going to reduce the emissions at the pace and scale that science requires, we need to obviously do a bunch of things. One is to move to what they call more preferred materials, and we're not going to go into the detail of that, but also a next generation material strategy. And then, of course, they talk about, like many of us, slowing growth, which is a whole nother podcast in and of itself.
Mhm.
So that's the context where I was like, Nicole, what's going on here? This is your sweet spot. But maybe I should let you confirm that. So first off, can you just again introduce yourself for everyone who just may not know who you are? Unlikely. Um, how Canopy works with fashion and apparel, specifically also with climate action.
Yeah, for sure. So, Canopy is a solutions driven not for profit organization, and we work to protect the world's forests, species, climate, and help advance frontline community rights. And we do that by transforming supply chains that currently drive deforestation and forest degradation. We have a particular focus on the paper packaging, and wood based textile supply chains. And so, within the apparel sector, obviously, there's a lot of packaging that is part of just the global logistics of fashion. And there's a family of fibers. The third largest actual fiber type that's used in apparel, that's called man made cellulosic fibers. So those are textiles like rayon, modal, viscose, lyocell, and they are derived from forest ecosystems. There's 300 million trees that are mowed down every year to make viscose and rayon textiles, and it's growing quite aggressively. And so we work with just over 550 brands and retailers at the moment. They represent over $1 trillion in annual revenues. We help them to develop cutting edge environmental policies and then work with them to implement those policies and engage their conventional suppliers to shift their practices out of high carbon, high biodiversity value forests, the forests that we would call ancient and endangered forests. Um, and in doing so, they're transforming or creating the financial incentives, the business proposition for there to be a change in business as usual. And in doing so, are transforming these conventional supply chains that have been really impactful, devastatingly so, on the world's forest ecosystems, the biodiversity that we share this planet with, as well as our climate. And as you will know, and many of your listeners will know, about a third of climate solutions is actually just the conservation of forest ecosystems and other natural landscapes. So these nature based solutions are incredibly important to the overall kind of climate movement. I often say that next gen materials, which I know is a little bit of a spoiler for us getting into next gen materials, I guess, next gen materials to forests and climate as renewables are to fossil fuels and climate.
Oh, interesting. So the idea is to take the pressure off the incentive to cut down these forests, these endangered forests, which are very, very, very important for climate action and sustainability overall. And by focusing on packaging and these materials and changing the need to cut down these forests or affect them negatively in any way, you are then preserving them. Is that the basis?
Yeah, we're basically, mobilizing the marketplace, the large corporate customers of these products, to not only be looking for price availability and quality, but also the sustainability profile, and have been, I would say, remarkably successful to date in shifting brands, and with that, the viscose supply chain out of sourcing from ancient and endangered forests over the last 8 years. Uh, we've had 71% of global viscose producers. They represent just over half of global viscose production by volume. They have all moved to make sure that they've got low risk of sourcing from these climate critical forest ecosystems. They've got a green shirt and Canopy's hot button report, which we publish every year. Um, and and I think it's really a testament to the power of collective action, right? Like no single company, no matter how big they are, can transform a supply chain all by themselves. And so what we've really done at Canopy is to build these pre-competitive spaces that are focused on delivering ambitious environmental goals and supply chain kind of transition. And then we bring brands together, kind of coalesced around this shared goal. And then, we work with the conventional producers. We work quite closely with the pipeline of innovators, and we are increasingly engaging in trying to mobilize the scale of investment that's required for the transition away from a linear extractive supply chain, that kind of take, make, waste production system, to a more circular next gen alternative.
You talked about packaging, right?
Yeah.
And you talked about the materials, the viscose, right? Um, can you just give a sense what is the impact of one versus the other or both together? Is packaging actually a significant sort of impact factor in textiles?
So packaging does have a massive footprint globally. There's just over 3 billion trees that are cut down every year, and that's billion with a B. There's 300 million trees that are cut down every year to make viscose textiles. So, relatively, the viscose supply chain has a smaller impact, but it's growing very aggressively. And of course, a lot of brands are looking to try and mitigate their utilization of synthetics that are derived from fossil fuels. There's also, I know that you've covered this on in some of your conversations, the concept of peak cotton, and so a lot of brands are looking to increase significantly their use of these wood-based or cellulosic textiles. But the great thing is that cellulose doesn't just come in trees; it's in every kind of all plant matter in the world. And so that's where the ability to transition this supply chain to something that's fundamentally more sustainable, I think, is incredibly exciting, and something that we just need to bring a little bit more of a sensibility of the art of the possible, because the solutions are there and they're ready to scale. We just need to put all those kind of pieces of the puzzle together now.
Okay, so I want to talk about those solutions, but I also want to sort of focus a little bit about what you said, which is there's a big demand always, especially with a growing industry for uh, fibers and materials. There is a massive debate. Uh, Maybe you wouldn't call it a debate about how much can we source from, as you say, cotton, peak cotton, or other natural materials. how bad or relatively bad synthetics are for their fossil
Mhm.
based properties, but also there's discussions about the microplastic shedding, all those sorts of things.
Yeah,
And so there's a constant move in the industry to seek something better, and yet there's not necessarily, as I see it, that much volume to get. But that doesn't change the fact there's a lot of demand. In fact, it is a sign that there's a lot of demand, but maybe not so much volume to meet that demand. So you are trying to figure out if there's this move to all these things, how do we do this in the right way? And can new
exactly.
solutions deliver on this and be scaled? And did I get that right?
You did indeed. Quite
Okay.
often with environmental issues, as you all know from covering climate for a long time, is that, the train's already pulled out of the station and it's kind of rocketing down the track towards that kind of chasm where kind of the bridge sort of ends partway over the chasm. And so we see that in particularly with the textile side of things, that 300 million trees is not a small impact on really high carbon, biodiversity critical forest ecosystems. But it is like it's slated to double within the next 8 years. And so it is kind of, we're at this inflection point within this production system where we can build a fence at the top of the cliff rather than a hospital at the bottom, which is so often the scenario that we're in when it comes to environmental issues. Like, we can redirect this value chain, this supply chain, to be fundamentally more circular and with that more sustainable before there are billions of dollars of infrastructure embedded within mills that have been built in the middle of the Amazon or the boreal forest. And so I think that's what makes this kind of moment in time exciting, is that kind of ability to fundamentally uh, redirect the supply chain to actually be 21st century compatible.
Okay. So tell me, do you refer to these solutions as you hinted to in the very beginning, as next generation solutions?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is in the area of man made cellulose textiles, right?
That's our focus because
Yes.
we're kind of, our mission and mandate is to protect forest ecosystems. And that being said, we do work with a pipeline of, game changing innovators. And some of them are entities like Circ. They're a fantastic technology. Hopefully, they'll be announcing their first commercial scale facility very soon. They have the ability to take blended textiles, which is, as you know, the majority of textile waste that is in the world is a blend of both cotton and polyester, and so up until now, part of the conundrum and the challenge has been, how do you actually kind of separate those two out from each other? And so some of the innovators that we work with, like Circ, like Evernew, have technologies that can separate those two distinct fibers away from each other. And their production line is then a recycled PET and a recycled cellulose, both of which can then feed back into those respective production systems.
Right. Okay. And I knew Luke and others fairly well who are doing
Mhm.
that work. It is very exciting. This idea that we can, there's the sort of blue sky innovative thinking, which drives a lot of uh, our macroeconomics and our visions for how industries should develop in the future. And next gen is a very, your proposition is quite clear to me, but it's obviously innovation is always hard, and we've worked in this particular industry for a very long time, and there's been a lot of promises about what can be delivered and when it's going to be delivered and how quickly we're going to be able to do textile to textile recycling and at what scale, and is there the economics right for it. Why are you, if you are so optimistic about this, or are you optimistic? Maybe that's the first question. And the second is, you know, if you are optimistic about certain things, why? And if there's certain things that are challenging, what are those? Big question.
Okay. Whew, let's
Did it-
settle in. Actually, before I go there, can I just back up a little bit and maybe give a bit of a broader um, uh, definition or grounding of next gen materials? Um,
Sure.
be- because when I mean, definitely textile to textile, kind of production is part of the next gen kind of basket, for want of a better word. But for at Canopy, we see that next gen materials are low carbon, circular alternatives to forest derived clothing or packaging. So that means that clothing or packaging can be made from inputs that would otherwise be burned or landfilled. So when it comes to packaging, agricultural residues like wheat straw, hemp hurd, they're perfect for making boxes, even kind of semi flexibles. On the clothing side, of course, as you were just speaking to, taking textiles and diverting them out of landfill or brick kilns to be broken down to a fiber level and then fed back into the value chain so that they become next season's clothing. That is that is a kind of part of the next gen fiber basket for textiles. But also, some of the innovators that we're working with are utilizing agricultural residues, industrial food waste. And so, when we speak about next gen materials at Canopy, the inputs are like quite varied. So long as they've got cellulosic content, and they are otherwise destined to be landfilled or burnt.
So if we come back to that question, then,
Hmm.
uh, I mean, if I put some context, now it's my turn to put some context.
Yeah, please.
There was, I think, a report from BCG, Boston Consulting Group,
Hmm.
right on next gen, uh, which I believe projected that with the right incentives or conditions, that 8% of the fibers or materials, and I don't know how they break that down, I apologize, could be next gen by 2030. And again, they may have a different definition of yours. But again, here's the sense, like, we need to move in that direction for a variety of reasons, for demand purposes, for environmental purposes, to relieve the pressure off of forests and endangered forests. Um, is that a realistic projection to you? Are you optimistic that we can do that, even though the solutions like CERC are exciting and they're starting to move in terms of building a factory? Is that an optimistic projection or not? And what do we do? How should we think about this? What's the status?
Yeah, I saw that report and thought it was excellent. Uh, that report covers synthetics, cotton, and man made cellulosics, and kind of like the full range of fibers that the apparel sector draw on. Canopy's focus, as we've been speaking about, is really on these cellulosic fibers, particularly viscose, rayon, and lyocell. And our 2033 target, to be honest, is to have replaced 50% of the virgin forest fiber from the viscose fiber basket with next gen alternatives to ensure that there's absolutely no ancient and endangered forests being cut down to make textiles.
50% of the basket that exists today should be sourced not from endangered forests.
Well, actually, we would say that absolutely we should have an absolute zero tolerance for any ancient and endangered forest in the textile fiber basket. But our projection is that by 2033, 50% of kind of the input that viscose and lyocell and rayon is made from, that 50% of that will be a next gen input.
Got it.
That's what we're aiming for.
Okay.
Um, as you noted, there is a really exciting pipeline of innovators, actors like Cirque and their fantastic team who are full steam ahead to announce their first commercial facility very soon. and then really looking at kind of scale. How do they move to scale as quickly as possible with mills 2, 3, and afterwards? Obviously, there was Renewcell had a challenging start to the market as the pioneer, but they kind of, with Altor's engagement, Circulos, I know, we've been working with their team, are close to announcing, their re-entry into the market. And then even just in the last 3 weeks, we have had two large conventional viscose producers in China launch and open their own commercial pilot facilities that only utilize next gen as the input. And this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, but our team will be in China next week, and there are another two conventional viscose producers that will be announcing other next gen initiatives. And so things are moving very quickly. And so sometimes, as in the natural world, evolution can happen very slowly. And then you have these revolutionary kind of movements, these upheaval in tectonic plates or a volcanic eruption. And I feel that's we're on that precipice when it comes to the scaling of next gen within the viscose and rayon supply chain, which is the third largest fiber type used by the fashion industry. So it's perhaps a little bit more, it's positioned well, I think, to be a pace setter for the sector in terms of what's actually possible.
So you are very optimistic.
I am.
And I must say it's been sort of a little bit of a theme in some of my interviews for this climate action week of the optimism, and it's nice to hear. You are an optimistic person, I think, in general, but tell me if I'm wrong there. But there's it's easy to critique these things, and it's easy, I think, to get very starry-eyed with innovation talk and narratives about pilot projects that will transform the world. But with Renewcell, and let's talk about that for a second, which is now reconstituted, and you said you were going to tell us about that there. Um, a lot of say that some would say there's not the right drivers, the economic drivers to drive the uptake of this next generation of materials, and that you need legislation and other economic incentives. Uh, but you're seeing it with all the mobilization that you and others are doing over the years, that this is now moved from a slow evolution to something that may be at its tipping point. So what happened with Renewcell? Do you think that now you see that the sort of industry is adapting in a way that wouldn't happen again maybe as easily? What did you learn from Renewcell, and in its new constituted form is going to maybe make it successful when the first iteration was not?
All thanks need to go to the team at Renewcell and the investors that were behind that. It's never easy to be the pioneer. We've seen that time and time again, be it within the renewable space, kind of the EV space, right? Those that are first to market, especially when you've got a long value chain, as we have within the fashion industry, like it is, there were a lot of pieces that Renewcell were working out in real time. And so, we often talk in the innovation space about, we're kind of attaching the propeller whilst we're wheeling the plane onto the tarmac. Like that was really the case with Renewcell. And I mean, there were a number of challenges. I think, to be honest, the fatal flaw for them was their financing, the type of financing that they had, the fact that they IPO'd so early in raising the capital that they needed to run it. It placed a really onerous burden on a startup. So they were literally, still tightening kind of bolts and working out which way the valves needed to be turned on and off. And they were expected to be selling product even before they'd actually hit spec, right? Like, and during the commissioning phase. That's like incredibly difficult to succeed with. And then when you feed that into a value chain, that just by the virtue of how many steps there are in the value chain, and just the lead times that are generally involved, uh, their financing timeline and the timeline that it takes to pull new product through a long value chain that goes from a pulp mill to a fiber producer who needed to make some adjustments, to then a spinner who needed to make some adjustments, to the dyer, to the weaver, to like all these stages, each one having to slightly refine their process because they're working with a new fiber. Doesn't mean that there was anything wrong with that fiber. It just performs slightly differently than, the ones that they have become accustomed to working with. And so I think that we all learnt a lot, as a result of Renewcell's experience. And those lessons have been well and truly taken and being built into the way that we are collectively moving forward. The work that Canopy is doing with our brand partners is reflective of that. We're conscious of the need, especially with these earlier products, to have a more optimized value chain. As you know, the fashion industry is massive, and if you have, only one mill's worth of pulp, which is what Renewcell and is what Circ will produce, going into this massive supply chain in very, very small volumes, then you don't get an economy of scale production at any point. And if you simplify, so if you step back and simplify that supply chain, and it's, perhaps there are 3 or 4 viscose producers, that are the initial leaders in working with that fiber. They get an economy of scale production, which helps both with their quality production as well as their pricing. It then gets fed into a little bit more of an optimized value chain. I think we're really aware and having conversations with government around the need for there to be, some sorts of support for early to market products as they're moving towards achieving economy of scale, to help smooth out some of those early to market premiums, as well as just aggregation platforms for aggregating the market pull through. So there's a variety of initiatives that, Canopy has stepped forward to develop and lead, with the advice of brands and producers and innovators. And we know that some of our colleagues within the movement, like our friends at Fashion for Good, are also trialing some new approaches as well.
So your role there now is it both to help get financing or mobilize financing for some of these specific innovations, as well as to be a spider or a facilitator uh, around policy? Are both those things you're working with?
Yeah, I mean, I would characterize Canopy's role as a not-for-profit business system enabler, right? Like
Okay.
building and facilitating the markets for next gen, um, working with the innovators and conventional producers, both as kind of a speed dater, trying to smooth out sort of when there are issues, actively troubleshooting with our brand partners, with the innovators, with the conventional producers around what's needed. And then, yes, of course, money is a significant factor uh, at all stages of an innovator's development. And so, definitely we have made introductions with Series A, Series B, even Series C level investors. Our focus in the investment space is really around that scaling equity. I think you mentioned in your comments before, like how excited should we be getting about pilots? I mean, pilots are obviously important on that path, but we need to be accelerating the transition to commercial scale production. And so that's really where we're focusing in terms of mobilizing investment and capital, is on those private equity tickets that are needed to help unlock the broader finance package for commercial scale production, It looks a little different in kind of Europe and North America, where private equity can come to play, and private capital kind of in debt financing. In the global south, it's a little bit different. And so we are currently working to develop a $2 billion blended finance platform for India, just recognizing that um, uh, that these new circular next gen supply chains will develop in hubs to start off with. India is uniquely positioned, as is China, to be one of those early global leaders in next gen production. To be honest, Europe and North America are well positioned as well. But the kind of capital that you need for jurisdictions like India is different than the kind of capital that can move into a jurisdiction like Europe. So, in
So
Europe,
this hub idea, maybe you can just give us a little bit more concrete. It's it's a hub bringing together different producers, different funders, different governments. How does it? Is this an ecosystem concept as well?
it is an ecosystem concept. It's just recognizing that if we think of kind of car manufacturing or that it's not just the car manufacturing plant. There's the whole kind of business ecosystem that builds up around it, um, and and it's going to be the same with next gen materials. Like we need kind of next gen pulp mills to be built, or conventional pulp mills to be retrofit, so that they, rather than needing trees to be fed in at the front end, they can take old jeans and t-shirts or industrial food waste. Um, but you also need the broader ecosystem. You need kind of the textile aggregation and pre-processing plants, right? So there's an the concept of actually having those develop in regional hubs is something that we think is actually going to, that's our working hypothesis anyway, of what's going to be the way forward. And it's going to require the brands and producers and innovators being enabled regionally, with enabling policy, and with both global and local investors coming to the table.
So, of course, you are doing this. You've received this as a number of awards, including is it the Audacious Award, right? So, this is another audacious activity that you're doing, Nicole. I mean, uh,
Perhaps.
taking on a whole, helping to facilitate the startup of a whole ecosystem for this kind of work. Um, you're optimistic. You're optimistic both about some individual companies now being prepared to scale. You are saying that you're getting some engagement from the policy world, that this is, I guess, the way to go. What's on your wish list for the future? Like, if you could wish for anything to unlock this better, faster, more productively, what would be on your wish list if you pick one or two things?
Ooh. Well, that's a really good question. If I ruled the world, uh, well, I think that the main thing is that this is not a spectator sport, right? Regardless of where people are within the fashion industry or within government or investment community, everybody has a role to play. Um, and so, I would say with policymakers, it's really thinking through. And I think, to be honest, there's been some really significant pieces of legislation developed, and regulatory risk associated with conventional sourcing is a big motivator, both for conventional producers as well as for brands. I think that on a policymaker side, really leaning in to develop the kind of suite of policies, or even just to retool some of the policies that were developed for the scaling of renewables, and thinking of them for scaled development of next gen materials. Because there's a lot of support that's available for pre commercial scale, but we need to be much more ambitious in terms of the timelines and the volumes that we're expecting. So for policymakers, I think it's really about them stepping in and bringing a suite of enabling policies that's going to enable the scale of investment that's required and the scale of production, and really help those first to market products to um, to scale. Investors need to write bigger checks, right? There's a decent VC ecosystem, but larger investors, especially those that are working together to scale a whole ecosystem, are there's a much smaller number of those, and so I would just say that, be it in the blended finance space or the private capital, we need early movers. Um, with brands, my wish list would be publishing really ambitious 2030 targets. We have a couple of leaders that are out with those, like Inditex have several years ago, published those kinds of targets. They just really set the bar, and help build confidence with investors, with the value chain, that this is the direction that everybody's heading, and then purchasing orders, right? Really leaning in to pull through these early to market products. And then I would say the last one are the subset of the producers, which is really to recognize that this is the direction that this supply chain's heading, um, that and that investing in these mill retrofits, as we're seeing now in China with 4 large commercial producers of viscose, all developing and launching their own commercial pilot facilities for next gen within a month. That's the kind of pace and scale and prioritization that we need to see. So that's more than one, but maybe it's just kind of one for each of the primary players
Yeah,
within.
you took the opportunity to wish for
Yeah.
lots of things. Very good, Nicole.
You should see my Christmas list.
I just wanted to wrap up by linking this to your parallel to renewable energy and the green sort of energy revolution. Um, is it similar in the sense that there's a sense that this is the way you have to go? Because on one hand, if you of course understand the environmental impacts of these materials, you understand that. But the idea that this is the preferred way, that this is the old way is not profitable anymore, and the new technologies are disrupting the old, as we do in energy, the fossil fuels, the coal, peak coal, those sorts of things. Is that parallel so clean, or is this a harder area to think in that terms? Because I don't know if everyone's like, well, yeah, I mean, viscose materials for textiles, that's the next renewable energy kind of thing. So just give me a sense of how clean of a parallel is that?
Yeah, I think this is the sleeper kind of hit movie. I would say that it has definitely not had the same kind of awareness, um, and it absolutely is the renewables parallel. Um, and conventional producers and brands really recognize that this is the direction that things need to head. I would say that China is generally building the supply chains for the future, and this is definitely the direction that they're heading in, and it's embedded in the government's 14th five-year plan. And part of that is because of the fact that the conventional take make waste production system is really, it's a relic of the last 150 years of production, and it's no longer fit for purpose, right? Like there's climate disruptions, extreme weather are increasingly part of our lives. There were like each and every year we're having more intense and more frequent forest fires. And so the conventional supply chain for viscose textiles is just increasingly volatile, like it's literally going up in smoke. There were 20 million hectares of forest that burnt in Canada, like not last summer, but the summer before. And that's not to count on top of that the fires that there were in Chile, across Europe, in Australia, in other parts of Southeast Asia. And so, even if it's just from a mitigating supply chain volatility and diversifying the fiber basket so that it's more resilient, um, this is a shift that is going to happen, and so it's really around how quickly can we make it happen, and how do we ensure that we help safeguard these landscapes that are really critical, as nature-based solutions as we try and mitigate climate change as well as stem the decline in biodiversity. Um, so that's why I'm confident that this is something that uh, is not just about to take off, but we're in the kind of early stages of that actual kind of launch phase.
Nicole, as usual, always inspired and impressed, and wish you lots of energy as you collect and drive this. Thank you for talking to us.
Oh, thanks. Always a pleasure. And I think we didn't talk at all. You were very disciplined, not talking about some of the mayhem that is happening in the world. But there's a new world order that is building, right? New alliances, trade alliances, um, and and this accelerated transition to next gen production, I think, is going to be one of the beneficiaries of that.
That's interesting. So, because the Trump administration could be said to be trying to, in practice, isolate itself from its role in the broader world, some would argue um, that it's making other nations and places around the world to rethink who they're partnering with, and therefore wanting to take the lead. Is that what you're suggesting?
Absolutely.
Okay. So you see this as an opportunity, if you can harness it for the right things, this new shakeup of the world order that has happened so quickly, as a real opportunity for new partnerships and to go with those countries and organizations who are interested in behaving a little differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see, Europe clearly has been prioritizing a transition to circularity and to next gen. The EU deforestation regulation very clear in terms of restricting the European market to high carbon or risky forest products. You have China very clearly pivoting their material space to kind of follow in the footsteps of what they've done with renewables and transport, electric transport, and then India is also very quickly moving in this direction. Prime Minister Modi has been very clear and vocal in his support around the importance of Indian textile industry shifting towards more circularity, how it builds on their tradition, as well as setting very aggressive trade targets. And so, Canada's also in the mix and looking for new friends and greater economic ties. So I think there's like as this new world order and uh, trade affiliations develop, then yeah, I see that uh, circularity and low carbon material production is going to be a factor, um, with the players that are stepping forward more as the US steps back. And to be honest, I think next gen can work in the US as well, right? There's a lot of fiber next gen kind of inputs. There's a lot of agricultural residue. There's a lot of textile waste. There are a lot of shuttered facilities of different kinds around the US. It's not that it can't work in the US as well, but I think as there's space on the global stage, the players that I see stepping forward, there's a natural alignment for prioritizing more sustainable, more circular, next gen materials as part of the mix.
And again, it's pleasantly surprising to hear your assessment of that. If you're a cynical person and think naturally this is driven by risk management or profitability, you again are making the case that that's what's happening now, that these solutions that we need anyway, circularity, more sustainable solutions, next gen solutions for this segment of textile fibers and packaging, these are good for the planet, and they're also turning out to be the right choice economically for different production countries.
Absolutely. Otherwise, it's called charity, right?
Right. No, I know that's what you think,
I
but
work
it's not
I work
always
with
that there's a line.
I work with a not-for-profit. I know about charity,
Yes.
but this is about transforming business and supply chains, and there is there is a business imperative for this transition to be happening as quickly as possible, and it's being driven by the regulatory risk about associated with just continuing with take make waste production systems. There are competitive IRRs or return on investments to be made. The technical performance of many of these fibers do allow for kind of other larger kind of efficiencies, and then volatility and supply chain resiliency are really important factors. Like that's
Mm,
even without taking into regards, like, does this help producers and countries and individual brands hit their sustainability and their climate targets? Just from other business metrics, this transition is happening. And that's from a government and a governance perspective. There's also social advancement and pollution abatement and the health issues and
mm.
benefits associated with that. Like this ticks a lot of boxes, regardless of whether you're working in government, whether you're working within a multilateral bank, whether you're working within a kind of like a family office or within a brand.
I think we should
Wrap.
wrap on that one. Wow. All right, Nicole. Let me hit the stop. Well, maybe I should just do
Make it stop. Make
make
it
it
stop.
stop. It's so optimistic. Nicole, thank you so much again for updating us on where you're at and what you think is possible and how things are going now. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise. I really appreciate all the work that you do in the space as well. Big fan.